Born in the city of Harlem, New York on October 8, 1930, Faith Ringgold was the youngest of 3 children. Although being diagnosed with chronic asthma, Ringgold describes her childhood as the most wonderful time in her life. "It gave me time alone with my mother," explains Ringgold. "My mother was a fashion designer at the time. She taught me how to sew and how to be creative with art and fabrics. My mother also took me to museums and to see great performers. She put me in touch with the best of everything." Ringgold grew up in the Great Depression. However, she was not poor and oppressed. Her childhood home in Harlem was a vibrant and thriving art scene. Figures such as Duke Ellington and Langston Hughes lived just around the corner from her home. "We were protected from oppression and surrounded by a loving family," states Ringgold. In 1950, at the age of 20, Ringgold enrolled at the City College of New York to major in art. However, at this time, art was considered to be an exclusively male profession. Ringgold was required to change her major, so she took art education instead. That same year, she also married Robert Earl Wallace, a classical and jazz musician. The couple had 2 daughters together, Michelle and Barbara. After 4 years of marriage, it ended in divorce due to Wallace's drug addiction. Ringgold was left custody of the kids, and in 1959, she finally earned her degree. In 1963, at the age of 32, Ringgold was on the hunt for a gallery to show her work. As an African-American artist, this was no easy task. After rigorous searching, she had finally gotten herself a meeting with Ruth White, who ran a gallery in New York. The pieces that Ringgold had picked out for the gallery were still life and landscape paintings, which were very much in line with the gallery's focus. White examined all of the pieces Ringgold had brought and immediately told her that she could not show her works. Ringgold was stunned. After the meeting with Ruth White, Ringgold went home and discussed it with her new and current husband, Burdett. "You know something," explained Ringgold. "I think what she's saying is, it's the 1960s. All hell is breaking loose all over, and you're painting flowers and leaves. You can't do that. Your job is to tell your story. Your story has to come out of your life, your environment, who you are, where you're from." The encounter was transformative. "I realized I can't tell your story. I can only tell mine. I can't be you. I can only be me," Ringgold said. "Okay, I don't know that's exactly what she meant," she said of White, "but as far as I was concerned, it was, and I started painting." Exploring what it meant to be an African-American artist, Ringgold said, "I found my artistic identity and my personal vision in the 60s by looking at African masks, and my art form through the serial paintings of Jacob Lawrence. The powerful geometry of African masks and sculpture that informed modern art is what I like best about Picasso, Matisse, and the other modern European masters I was taught to copy. It is their exquisite compositions of shape, form, color, and texture that make Picasso, Matisse, and Jacob Lawrence's work so wonderful." Over the next few years, Ringgold would produce some of the most searing depictions ever made of race relations in America, beginning with her American People series of paintings, which presents interracial tensions with unflinching clarity. One of the first pieces in this series that made Ringgold one to watch is entitled Mr. Charlie. This piece, created in 1964, is oil on canvas. A mature white American businessman is depicted in bold colors, hard edges, and flat, simplified shapes. The man's vacant expression suggests someone so fixated on his own point of view that he cannot truly see or hear anyone else's experience. The title of the piece refers to the African-American expression, Mr. Charlie, which was used to describe a racist white man. Ringgold suggests the man has a kind of assumed privilege. He and the world reflect one another. The next piece, also oil on canvas, is one that really evolved Ringgold as an artist and is entitled Die. A part of the same series, this work depicts the race riots of the 1960s in America as a melee of random violence. As a whole, the piece has very vivid movement throughout. The repeating adult figures, African American and whites, are injured and fighting or fleeing, while a white boy and an African American girl huddle together in the center of the canvas, framed by the falling limbs of an African American man and a white woman being shot. The violence contrasts with well-dressed appearances of the figures, the men in black pants and white shirts, the women in fashionable dresses and heels. This piece, and many of Ringgold's works, represents her experience of the violence generated by racism and her fear that racial violence would become endemic. Another well-known piece, still of the same series, is entitled Woman Looking in Mirror. Here, an African American woman seated before a window, perhaps at the moment before getting dressed, as she appears to be wearing undergarments. The woman looks into a handheld mirror, while in the background, the window overflows with blue and green geometric trees and bushes, suggesting an African landscape. The black branches and trunks of the plants frame the woman's form. This piece has broad color and is heavily outlined in black. This piece demonstrates to the viewer the importance of the woman's self-regard over those of the male gaze, or of white society. The feminist viewpoint, combined with one of black power, conveys the message that an African American woman is beautiful when regarded by herself. The next piece is part of a different series called the Black Light Series, Flag for the Moon, Die, N-Word. This is an oil painting on canvas that acknowledges the moon landing in 1969. Instead of the traditional flag that the American astronauts planted on the surface of the moon, Ringgold has inscribed Die in black lettering within the stars and has broken and changed the stripes so that the white stripes read the N-word. The work is part of her Black Light series, where Ringgold said that she intended to create a more affirmative black aesthetic. She also noted how white Western art was focused around the color white and light contrast, while African cultures in general used darker colors and emphasized color rather than tonality to create contrast. Here, she mutes the contrast of the traditional flag image. The stripes and stars are muted, as if overshadowed by racism. The final piece is from much later on in Ringgold's life and is entitled Tar Beach, from the Woman on a Bridge series. This piece is a quilt about a young African American girl. The scene is bordered by fabric squares, many of them with floral patterns, and at the top and bottom of the quilt, another border of rectangles contains text telling the girl's story. At the top left, the story begins. I will always remember when the stars fell around me and lifted me above the George Washington Bridge. Another section reads, Sleeping on Tar Beach was magical. Only 8 years old and in the 3rd grade, and I can fly. That means I am free to go wherever I want for the rest of my life. Ringgold's use of color and the repeating floral motif creates a garden-like border and a sense of familial warmth. By painting decorative embellishments onto her piecework with the same color, she has subtly unified the many and varied color blocks used to create the border. By adopting a native or folk technique that avoids perspective and shading, Ringgold suggests that the experience depicted in the work is being expressed directly and freely from within the internal life of her character. Ringgold drew upon her own experience growing up to create the character, but also wanted to convey an empowering feminist message. As she said of the series, my women are actually flying. They are just free, totally. They take their liberation by confronting this huge masculine icon, the bridge. All of the pieces just shown have been featured at museums. The audience for all of the pieces is most likely society because they all feature issues on racism. Ringgold's work was not only relevant when she made the pieces, it is also relevant today. It is no wonder that even at 85 years old, Faith Ringgold's star is still rising.